If you need a way to kill a couple of hours in the Davis Mountains, try Fort Davis National Historic Site. The U.S. Army established this frontier fort in 1854 and named it after then Secretary of War Jefferson Davis. And if you're vaguely familiar with the U.S. Civil War, the answer to your question is yes, that Jefferson Davis. During the Civil War, the Union Army abandoned the fort. The Confederate Army kept a small number of troops at the fort during the war. Mostly, its purpose was to provide protection for settlers in the Trans-Pecos region and to travelers passing through the area. I've seen a handful of U.S. military installations from that era, and most look like these foundations here. This site impressed us with the level of preservation and reconstruction. Pre-recorded bugle calls sound every 10 to 15 minutes, and there's a stack of handouts at the entry to the fort that explain each of the bugle calls. Sadly, we missed Reveille, but not by much. Actually, I don't think Dean was all that sad that we missed Reveille. Livestock roamed the ruins of the east side of the fort. This little goat lagged behind his equine friends who had already kind of wandered off from their pens to the grazing areas. We appreciated the roaming livestock, but if you're afraid of horses, just give them some space. In case last week's video didn't tip you off, Dean and I love astronomy. No astronomy geek can visit the Davis Mountains and skip the McDonald Observatory. Just be smarter than we were. Reserve a spot on the tour and plan for lunch. In hindsight, we should have gone back to the camper for lunch before heading up to the observatory. There's a cafe there, but an hour-and-a-half tour started right before the cafe opened, and we both had low blood sugar. So we had to choose between taking the guided tour on low blood sugar or getting a full belly and doing the self-guided tour. Yeah, I get hangry, and you would not like me when I'm hangry. In 1938, the Otto Struve telescope pointed up at the sky for the first time. At the time, its 82-inch telescope was the second largest in the world. Today, it's one of the three main telescopes at the McDonald Observatory. By the 1960s, the facility needed more magnifying power than the Otto Struve telescope could manage. In 1968, the Harlan J. Smith telescope joined the first telescope, and its 107-inch mirror was the third largest in the world at the time. This is the Hobby-Eberly telescope, whose mirror dwarfs both of the other two telescopes at 433 inches. It also has a pretty nifty visitor's lobby. After concluding our tour of the telescopes at the McDonald Observatory, we headed back to Fort Davis to gas up at the only gas station we could find. Then we set off on a 75-mile jaunt on the Scenic Loop around the Davis Mountains. We actually did it backwards from what most people do, starting off by heading westerly on 166. The first half of the loop was quite lovely. Starting around Rockpile, Mother Nature turned it up to 11 and didn't let up until we completed the loop. I'm just going to play some music for you and let you see the loop for yourself. We got back with about an hour and a half of sunlight left, so we stopped by the bird blind near the entrance. The pigeons had taken over that one. We see a lot of pigeons at home, so we decided to check out the Interpretive Center's bird blind again. It had been kind of a bust the previous night. This night it was a birding bonanza. 3 different species of woodpecker, several scrub jays, and several species that we haven't identified yet, and a couple of hummingbirds all visited. This video is a sample of what we saw, and this went on for at least half an hour. We pried ourselves away at sunset as the birds flittered off to settle in for the night. After dinner, we drove back up the Skyline Drive. We intended to grab some Milky Way shots, but a storm rolled in. Lightning flashed all around us, and we made lemonade out of the lemons. I think they turned out pretty well for our first lightning shots. I especially like the one with Fort Davis in the middle ground. Next week, we set off for 2 nights at Waco Tanks in El Paso, Texas, so be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified when our next video goes up. If you'd like to know more about the places we visited, check out the links in the description below.